And we're recording now.
Perfect. So just for any watchers of the video, we for technical reasons were unable to start the video right at the very beginning of our meeting, but we are currently looking at the statement that we worked on in the last meeting.
I feel like there's a lot going on in that last sentence. I just keep reading it over and over, trying to figure out what. I mean, I'm not totally opposed to it. There's just a lot going on in one sentence.
I did, well, let me read it. I was thinking if we were taking some of the verbs out, the taking action phrase, move all your verbs to active verbs. So grammatically that will, to commit to, ensuring a barrier for your safe environment. And then instead of semicolon it, put a period there and then start the next thing in.
I guess that goes into what the ultimate goal of the policy is. Is the goal to take action to go towards those things?
Another idea, looking at the second paragraph at the end of it, it says we commit to. Could you just put the colon there and then like bullet those next points out of that next paragraph? Strive to provide an educational experience that will honor and embolden every student to learn, thrive, and succeed. And then kind of each of those main points is a bullet point separate from each other, rather than making it another paragraph.
I personally I'm getting feedback on myself. When I'm reading something, I like short little bits. I'm a big fan of bullet points, but that's not necessarily the best. Whatever, I can see it both ways. I just found myself reading that last bit many times to try to be clear on each point.
So instead, I mean, we could easily put a period after we commit to taking action to ensure a barrier-free, safe, and supportive learning environment for all students, period. And not then start the next sentence instead of one which start it away so we can then make a bulleted list of the other things.
Equity policy. We also have succeed at the end of the first sentence, and then we say it again at the bottom. Obviously, success is a huge part of it, but do we want that in there twice?
I don't think these three words make sense there.
Yeah, if we eliminate those and then we have individual student success at the end.
Is this more of what you're talking about there, Marcy?
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going back and forth. I like bullet points just because that's how my brain works.
Right,
But
short and sweet.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily look as nice. I don't know if that matters. It's not like just a short little paragraph. I don't know. I could go either way on that.
The way you have the bullet points broken down though doesn't make sense because the one is referring to the barrier-free, safe, and
Right, I just saw that. So we want a barrier-free, safe, and supportive learning environment. That's all one sentence, really.
Yeah, so the one which is just defining what that environment looks like.
So like that instead.
I don't know that I'm explaining that correctly. So I think what that's trying to get across is we commit to taking action to ensure a barrier-free, safe, and supportive learning environment for all students. That environment will include the needed tools and resources, will affirm the identity of each student, acknowledges and celebrates differences, promotes student success, all those things.
Yeah, now that I said I like bullet points, I feel like if we're going to do bullet points, it's going to need a lot of rewording. I feel like what we have isn't bulletproof material.
Yes.
So I don't know if we necessarily like how I rephrased that, but I broke that sentence into two things.
Needed tools and resources.
So if you
Yes.
scroll back up, so I ended this sentence and then I changed that. I don't know.
I like it better.
But this environment should include I don't know.
I think that's pretty good.
To create a sense of belonging, student success.
Or I don't know what words I like. I'm playing around with them.
How about adding the word commit? We commit to providing the necessary tools.
We used commit in the previous sentence.
Okay. Ah, okay.
I like commit here better if we could figure out a different word for the sentence before. So the sentence before would, if we change it to, we will take action to,
I just did the same thing.
so this one, no, that doesn't, I don't want to change all of those to different tense.
So now,
The more we pick it apart, the more I don't like it.
yeah, something's wrong with that sentence now. We make a commitment to provide the needed tools and resources, affirms the identity. There's something missing in there. A one that affirms, right?
No, it just wouldn't be affirms, it'd be affirm. Yeah. Okay, so if I break this down, I mean, we may want to rephrase the whole thing, but if I break it down, those things are the goals of what we want to work towards changing. Does that seem accurate?
Mm-hmm.
But then if we look at the first three sentences, or the beginning part,
How about we will commit to provide the needed tools and resources.
no, that doesn't make sense with the rest of the sentence. Mm. I don't know what people want to focus on. I'm still looking at the beginning before we even get into that, because I feel like the first and the third sentence somewhat say the same thing, and then that sentence that we recognize equity for all students requires kind of is thrown in the middle of those two similar sentences. And I'm wondering if we rephrase that, then the ending part might fit better.
So you think swap the third and second sentences?
Well, just the first sentence, we're striving to provide an educational experience that will do this. And then this one will ensure a barrier-free environment for all students. So we're talking about we're providing an educational experience and a supportive learning environment. And in the middle of that, we're talking about what we think equity is. I think it's because we're trying to put the two definitions together, so they're both saying similar things.
What if we started with the second sentence? At Salem Washington Academy, we recognize the equity for all, right at the beginning, and then talk about how we strive to provide all those other things.
That's what I was thinking, but I didn't want to keep talking and lead everything. So I'm glad you said that. I was like, maybe I'm the only one who has thoughts about this because no one else is really giving suggestions. That, in my mind, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
What do other people think?
Anyone else have an opinion about that?
I wasn't sure if my mic was on or not. Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, and then if we break this part down, this is where we have these two sentences were from the two different definitions. And they both somewhat say the same thing, but are a little different. So I don't know if they want to be combined or if they're different enough to leave them both.
I think they're different enough. I mean, one talks about, emboldening this, and the other is more about the environment that would be provided. All under the heading of the educational experience. I don't know, that's what I see.
I think that's okay.
Is it just down to the four of us now in this room? Keep losing people?
There's no way Bob is here because he's not said a word.
I'm here. Just
Jenny now.
enjoying the work. Here's Jenny, though. I speak less as Jenny than I do as Bob.
Maybe I was looking at two different things. I tend to like to make things as concise as possible. So that might just be me. But I think reading through it, we're saying some of the same things. Like with the educational experience or emboldening every student kind of goes along with affirming their identity, acknowledging, celebrate differences. So I don't know if that goes along more with the ending part.
I think if you're worried about the two sentences being too similar, put them at opposite ends of the statement. Start one end of the statement with one, and then you can wrap up the other end of the statement with the other. There's certainly some similarities between the statements, but there are differences there. As in the five things that are between those two sentences, is there anything close enough to consolidate or no? I mean, emboldening a student is probably one of the more unique items onto there, and it's also a phrase that you don't hear often in equity statements about encouraging to have that voice. Whereas we hear everyone's unique, a lot.
Yeah.
We're all unique, right? In our own special ways. But things like barrier-free and safe and supportive almost come right out of our mission and vision we currently have. Now, to me, there should be some crossover between the two. Right? Because part of our vision and mission is in all students, and this is just taking a focus onto the equity piece where that falls with it. Affirming an identity. I don't know on that phrase. I think I think that acknowledging and celebrating differences is important, but part of that also I think comes to environment. If you're looking at similarities there, I think it's important to celebrate those differences and acknowledge that they exist. And belonging is environment, and promoting individual success as a student is environment.
This whole part right here was actually part of this sentence before, saying one which, meaning the environment includes these things. So this was a breakdown of what a safe and supportive environment would have these things.
So do you want your statement to have that level of detail on what the environment is, or we're going to have a kind of a step up and hold on to that for values pieces for planning for, you know what I mean? Like tools and resources to me is a goal number one. And we fit underneath what do we need to do for the groups for tools and resources. Just as an example.
Right, so if we just take the first portion alone, does that sum up our whole thing? And then the next portion would be part of, as we get into it a little more in the policy, I guess. I don't know all the terminology of what is actually the policy, but as a statement, does the top portion say everything we want to say?
Just to confirm, you mean this alone, correct, Marcy?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I don't know, do people think it's important in the statement to include the things that will, like, I feel like this part is a breakdown of the areas we'll be looking at further. So is that important to
Right.
include with the general statement, or is that breakdown not important to have?
Right, I guess that's the question.
When I look at the statements and I think about the direction of the policy, for me, equity is one thing, and educational equity is a component part of it. So for me, it's almost like two equity. The first equity for me is that broad stroke equity.
Mhm.
But the policy really will be addressing the educational components of that equity. So maybe there's some way to, at the beginning of the statement, talk about equity and then narrow the focus down to the educational focus of the policy, what we can do at Salem Central School to make sure that every child leaves ready to go to do whatever it is they want, whether it's college or workforce or service or whatever. So maybe we can include equity, educational equity, and talk about the environment at school.
In this portion?
Or in that next portion that you're kind of struggling with.
Are there any guidelines to what should it, Should this type of statement be one paragraph only? Should it be like, is there a guideline for how much you put into this? What I guess what I'm looking at is, could this next portion be a whole nother paragraph where we say again, at Salem Washington Academy, da, 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 da.
That may be a good way to delineate those two separate.
That's what I'm thinking.
You definitely just want, I don't think there's any limitations or expectations. It's just you want people to read it and have an opportunity to take it in. So whatever format it's in, if it's, broken down into distinct components, it might be easier for people to kind of take it in.
So I'm gonna just throw something else in there, and other people might hate it. But I'm still looking at the second and third sentences. If we erase that sentence and combine those,
We could do that.
Yeah.
I see where you're going with that.
I don't know if do we want that will or that honors and embolden?
What was the first, before you said honors and embolden, what was the other option?
Will, honor, and embolden.
Oh,
I like the honors and emboldens.
What do people like better, having those two broken up or combining those two?
I think I like them combined. I see where you're going with it.
Part of the reason I was thinking was because like we're committing to making changes, but what I am thinking is we're really striving to do these things. I don't know. What do people think?
okay. I'm sorry. What came out of this? So the way it looks right now, what was the other option? There was a whole nother sentence?
Yep.
Okay.
She just
So
combined them together.
Yeah, I put this part at the end of that.
Okay. I like it the other way.
Without this.
Right. Correct.
What do other people think?
I like that one as well. It
It's
kind
a-
of simplifies it. It's not as wordy, but it expresses the same thought. So this next, the next part that's down there, we're trying to figure out how to make that a part of it, because we all like the needed tools, resources, affirming the identity of each student. Is that something we want to try to keep and put in with it, or are we just going with the simplified statement?
What I'm seeing is the beginning of a bigger piece. So I see, kind of the first paragraph or two here gives us an overview of where we're headed, kind of a belief statement or a philosophy of where we want to head. And then the next section of something that gets into more detail that's there. So I think we would be good with, here's kind of a more general statement. And then as the policy piece or the plan gets further along, then these pieces come out into more actionable items.
So you think that second portion where the cursor is right now, not be part of the statement?
I suggested earlier, it's like, for like goal number 1, needed tools and resources to achieve equity at Salem Washington Academy. And then let's break down for what we need to do for that. To affirm the identity of each student. There, acknowledge and celebrate differences. Create a sense of belonging. Promote individual student success. Now, actually, now I say those out loud, those last two fall underneath, acknowledge and celebrate differences. That's to help create a sense of belonging. That's to help promote individual success. So here's 2 or 3 goals and some suggested objectives underneath that we could work with to move into next phrase or next phase. No more.
I mean, I really do think that first section says it all. I agree with Dr. Glover, is what I'm saying. So, because well, I like short and sweet. I'm more likely to read it and take it all in.
So that first paragraph here, like he said, is the overall statement. Down here is some of the things that we plan to do to make this portion happen.
Right.
Yes and no. Like I don't know that we need to add more to the first statement necessarily.
No, I agree. That's not what I'm saying.
But
I think it's
reading
more
through
of a
other
follow-up
equity-
statement.
Yeah, I'm just not sure exactly where that follow-up statement fits. Because I do think one thing we'll look at are probably the tools and resources, but I don't know that those other things are necessarily things that we'll have as a category.
I guess that's maybe where I'm a little stuck is I don't know where we go from here. I don't know how you lay out or do the policy. So I'm assuming that we would cover all that stuff within the policy, but I don't really know how that all works.
Right, because I think our goal is to make sure we're affirming the identity of students and acknowledging and celebrating differences, and that's part of our goal, I guess. But those aren't necessarily all action items. So I'm not sure where those fit.
So within the policy, I guess I need to read some more policies and think about it in this way. So within the policy is the action items. Do we also there say, so like, the needed tools and resources, and then how we're going to, maybe I'm jumping ahead.
No.
I just don't want to, I don't want to leave anything out of this part, but I also don't want, if it's, okay, so like of each student, that would be a section within the policy where we would break that down and talk more about that. Is that how?
Not really. Well, I don't know, because if we're creating our own policy, then it can be however we want it. But most policies I've looked through, they do have a section about like addressing curriculum and resources and tools. But then other sections get more into like trainings for teachers and why, like, what is that addressing? Well, the trainings would be to help teachers understand why it's important to acknowledge and celebrate differences. And because I think our goal is to eventually create a sense of belonging, but that's like, that will be addressed under every category.
Right.
So I'm like, as I'm looking at this and talking through it, I'm wondering if like taking out the needed and tools and resources, that probably will be a category. But the other parts of it, these are more like the ultimate goal of why we're writing the policy, not necessarily different categories. So I don't know that they have to be in the first sentence, but I think they're two different things.
For those interested, I just threw it in the chat. It's actually our attendance policy. Its layout and structure was kind of where my brains were in the suggestion. I cut myself off of my own mute. To change over just to give you an idea, because it starts off with a statement of overall objectives and then description of each description of strategies to meet objectives, determination of, and then it goes into some definitions work. But it's those first two sections, and it's kind of where I was in my brain. Just not for rating, just for structure purposes. There's a couple other policies that are in here that are structured the same way.
It brought me to, where am I looking?
It should have brought you to board docs, and it should have popped up to tell you it's going to an external site.
Yep, that came up, and then it went to like when the next meetings are.
Okay, so if you click on policies and go under students and 7,000 is policy 7110.
Do you want me to stop sharing my screen so you can just pull it up, Dr. Glover?
I can do that if you'd like.
I've got it now. I don't know if anybody else needs it, but I can see it now.
Yeah, it was just for reference, really. I mean, if the group's interested, then great, but it was just reference for structure was all.
So if I'm looking at the attendance one, that last part kind of goes into, we will revise a attendance policy to meet the following objectives, which for equity, it wouldn't be revising a policy, it'd be creating one. But do we need to somehow end that first part?
Learning environment honors and improvements for students.
I don't think we would have, in here, any equity policy will look in kind of verbiage very different, I would think. But instruction of like this policy kind of goes through, here's, the overall, the objectives, here's some strategies we're going to follow. These are where we're going to pay attention and how we're going to track the data on it. This is how it impacts course credit. I don't know. I don't think we have an equity course credit, but we would likely talk about course access or curriculum or something along those lines that fit in. I don't want notice may not in there. Incentives may apply. Despite, they're just, it's multifaceted. and it tries to address as much as it can in attendance for what a child's student experience is for their attendance. And then puts into some of those requirements like, review by the board of the annual data, building review of attendance records. There's an appeals process, and builds those kind of teeth type things that, one, we're paying attention to it, and two, we're going to continue to plan to make this something that we focus on. So, so for the words in there, I would say they would be different.
Yeah, and for me, the beauty of this process is whatever we write, we can edit and we can change and we can amend as we move along. So if, this gives us a start to look at policies and see how we want to frame our policy so that we are supporting these statements, we may find a clearer way to make those statements. We can change it as we go along.
That's what I was just thinking. Can we keep this? I think the first part is great, and then jump into our policy making or writing the policy wording, and then figure out this bottom section after we are a little more into what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's good to have gone through this, but then to kind of go and flesh out the rest and then come back and take a look at this.
Mm-hmm.
So then maybe the next thing is to take a look at some policies, look at the framework of some different policies, how we want it to be laid out, and talk about maybe some component parts.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. No, I think this was time well spent. I mean, I'd anticipated that we would get to some of that tonight, but I think that that we likely won't. But I think that this is good groundwork for then, having this in the back of our minds when we move forward. So we might come back and revisit this, or we'll come back and revisit this.
And I think our first part there is really good.
It definitely sets the tone and the purpose of the rest of the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So we're comfortable then leaving this as is for right now. Next meeting, we'll come back and look at policies, start to kind of flesh out 30,000 feet, what a policy will look like, and or maybe some from 30,000 feet, but then also some of the detail, and work through that, and then come back and visit this, because I think one of the things that I had started to do a little bit at one point was look and sort of look, when I did my first look at some of the policies back kind of even before I guess when we were first starting, or even before, was to see what was included in them, right? What's in, and so sort of do that, my mental checklist of, okay, this is what's in them, and then figure out what we want to put in ours.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that makes sense. I know that actually wasn't in, I think it was actually an article that was sent by NISPA the other day, or was in the NISPA, the New York State School Board Association has like a small newspaper that they send to board members. And one of the articles talked about, having the policy then also lay out those other expectations for, plans, that I think in one of them that building principals then are responsible to oversee the development of a plan for their building. And right, so having the general idea be in the policy, and then the policy dictates that then those plans will be made. So or whatever, right? Whatever, it doesn't have to be a plan, but whatever those other, where drilling down is going to happen.
I just want to share one other thing that, and I think it's from that same article, actually. There was a quotation or a little discussion with a director of equity for a school. And I wondered if it could ever make sense for a number of schools like us to get together to share a director of equity, somebody who, I mean, it's going to be a tough sell in this budget environment for us to have a director of equity, but also I think it's so I just wondered if you could actually get a really high caliber person, but you wouldn't want them spread too thin. But I just look at the amount of how beneficial this has been. We're meeting once a month. It's not that at some point, if that could ever make sense for a number of schools to get together and bring in somebody like that. So anyway, that was just another random thought that occurred to me when I was thinking about getting ready for this meeting.
Do any other schools around here, like Salem, or Cambridge, Greenwich, Greenfield, do they have that?
I can't imagine. I mean, so I don't know, but I think that that from a couple different folks who I've talked to who spend time in different schools and work with us, that they feel like we're on the front edge of this discussion compared to some other area schools. I'm not sure which schools, but so.
Good for us.
So I think
the school I work in is not really this area. It's Bennington, but we have a director of equity for the district. So it's a little bit, I mean, that's a bigger area, but it is
quite a bit bigger school.
Schools do have that.
Oh, I mean, in Albany, there's no doubt, right? You go to Albany, the school, there's, larger schools, there's no doubt. And also I think some of that in some schools is driven because of diversity, probably. So it's more in the front of people's minds. So yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there's loads of schools that do. I just think, but I think for schools of our size, I'm not aware. I don't know are you, Dave? I mean, I wouldn't expect most schools like us to have a director of equity.
No, I'm just trying to go through the list. Like Niskayuna has one. I'm not sure about Ballston Spa. I won't say they do. I don't think Saratoga does yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's not in their future. So it tends to be that size of a school that has the direct. Schenectady has one, but for a smaller school of our size, that 400 to under 1,000 range, I don't know of. They may be here, but I don't know of any of in our area.
It definitely sounds like something that could be shared among a few of our smaller schools.
Right.
And there is mechanism for that to happen. It would kind of follow the same path, I would think, as a curriculum director or something similar we would share between schools.
Yeah. It's interesting to bring up, though, because I think that could be a beneficial position for schools to have, because equity really does include a lot of different areas, from professional development to looking at curriculum to looking at discipline to anything and everything in between. So
Absolutely. Right. And there's, as we've talked about in the past, I mean, there's the various types of diversity that we have, right? So looking at equity across all those types of diversity.
Right.
I'm glad to see the benefit that we have from having our communications person, and just that knowledge that she brings, that just helps us, right? I mean, she's a huge resource, and I think that having somebody who could be a resource would in this area would only help us with this exact same type of work, right? So perfect. So are we? We're just over an hour in. Are we feeling like we'll we'll come back then in a month and revisit. We'll start digging into the policy side and then come back to this statement.
That sounds good.
Perfect.
Is there anything we need to do between now and then?
I think it would be beneficial. It'd be beneficial for me to go back and look at policies and start kind of, not just come in and have a discussion about it, but I think if we were able to go and look at some of those policies, then and refresh for those who have, I think that would just make us more efficient next time. I don't know if there's anything above and beyond that. Do you have any thoughts of something above and beyond that, Kristen?
No, I just didn't know if there was anything we should do.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think it's great. Like, I think that it makes sense to, I think like tonight, I felt like it was great because we were ready to hit the ground running. It ended up being most of the hour discussion, but because there was that pre-work done, we'd done the pre-work in the last meeting. But I think in this case, with these policies, the pre-work could be done just by familiarizing ourselves with various policies, and with an eye to sort of like what they include and how they're done, and then bring some of that experience back. I mean, if we have with a group this size, I think we just all stay together. If we had added 2 more people, I think it would make sense to break up into a couple groups of 4 and or more and go through those.
I do have a question, because I know at one of the first meetings it was discussed kind of doing a survey or a needs survey of some sort. Has that been looked at anymore? Because if I remember correctly, I think the goal was to have some data to help support what might be needed in the policy. I mean, I think it's helpful to look at other policies to see what they're doing, but to make it more specific to Salem, is there certain data we'll be looking at or that's going to be collected?
We have the climate survey from, was that 2 years ago? Maybe even 3 years ago now that we talked about.
Yeah,
Probably 3, right?
yeah, and we do have, I'm not sure, I don't think it started yet, but the county survey we had talked about, that's good, that should be happening sometime here in the near future. We got our first reach out here a little bit ago about it's time, so that survey should be coming out again.
I'm always a little bit of a skeptic because our population's so small, even our entire population's small, that just it can be hard to, I'm always worried of overinterpreting results or misinterpreting results because it wouldn't take many people in any direction to skew. And so I guess that doesn't mean don't do it. It just means we always need to be really aware of that. Because I think that, we wouldn't want to, I think we could easily draw a wrong conclusion when you're dealing with a really small population. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I guess I was just curious because I'm not as familiar with Salem. So I've looked at a lot of policies and I'm like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. But then I'm like, is it relevant for Salem? I'm not positive because I don't work in the school and I'm fairly new to the area. So
I think in the climate survey, socioeconomics were the biggest concern. And my guess would be that's still the biggest thing we struggle with.
My recollection is that there also may have been some confusion in the way that people classified themselves on a couple of the questions.
Oh.
I'll have to go back and refresh my memory, but my recollection is that there may have been some confusion. But I think it'd be that I guess I'm feeling a little remiss for not remembering better. I mean, because we had talked about that. Was did one of our breakout groups look at the climate survey at one point? I don't feel like I did, but I feel like, does anybody recollect that?
Bob, we did not look at the results of the climate survey per se, but we did look at some of the surveys, the equity surveys that were available to do starting with a new tool.
Okay,
But it was almost, with everything that's going on this year, we weren't really sure that this may be not the first thing we tackle is get that survey out, but sort of start to give ourselves some structure and then see where we want to head and then use the survey, as we move forward. So,
no, and that was probably reported when we came back, unless, I remember I made us very late one time, so. 'Cause my breakout group was really late coming back. Perfect.
Yeah, I didn't mean to keep everyone on here. I guess I was just wondering if there was any specific data we were using, like as we're looking at policies, just to see what would be more relevant. But that might be getting to a whole nother level. So
No, I think it's a good question. And I mean, I think the one, so the one piece of the data that we would have currently from our district would be that climate survey from about 3 years ago. And I think that was, we actually have that, right? That's in the Google Drive, I believe. And so that would be, I think, if we're looking at talking about our school specifically, although I think the county level stuff would probably speak to our general community as well. And I think, then when we start looking at the policy, because when I first read the policies, one of the things that jumped out at me was, the epidemiologist in me was thinking, okay, we're not gonna have a big enough population to have, we're gonna be at risk of drawing a wrong conclusion from the size of the population we have. So then personally, my thought at the time was, not necessarily digging into that or creating a lot more data, but was just from, we know from people's experiences that this is an area we should be talking about. So having that be our justification for starting this process. And again, that's not, none of this is a hill to die on for me. I think that when data presents itself, or at some point, if it makes sense to gather that data, then I definitely support it.
and because for us, when we were talking about it, we are looking at educational equity, and just the way things are structured right now, it's a unique construct. So it really is not reflective of how we would be moving forward. So if people were reflecting on what was happening currently, it still wouldn't give us, I think, what we would be looking for.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that is a good point. No, good question. So good to think through that. Any other thoughts?
no, I think everyone's tired.
So this is actually, Dave and I we had our communications committee meeting earlier today. So we're officially more than halfway through our meetings for the week with board stuff, as we meet again on Thursday. So
That's a special meeting?
Yeah.
correct. Yep. Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll adjourn at 7:21, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.